You're sending her with us? Master Chief, this isn't a PR mission. We need a shooter, not a liability. Lieutenant Commander Cade Bulldog Thorne's voice, a gravelly instrument accustomed to command, ricocheted off the thin canvas walls of the briefing tent. The sound, sharp and dismissive, sliced through the oppressive afternoon heat of the forward operating base in Kandahar province. The other SEALs of Alpha Platoon gathered around the makeshift table littered with satellite maps and ammunition magazines, shifted on their feet. Their expressions were a carefully curated blend of professional indifference and masculine amusement, the kind of look men share when a cherished, if prejudiced, assumption is voiced aloud by their leader. They were titans of modern warfare, sculpted by the brutal triage of BUD/S and forged in the crucible of a dozen unnamed conflicts. Their gear, a symphony of matte black polymer, coyote brown nylon, and worn steel, spoke of immense capability. They were loud in their quiet confidence, their very presence a declaration of lethality. And in their midst, an anomaly. Staff Sergeant Maya Anderson said nothing. She didn't flinch, didn't sigh, didn't even lift her eyes from the task at hand. She simply continued her methodical check of her M210 enhanced sniper rifle, her movements a study in practiced economy and fluid grace. Her hands, unadorned and calloused, moved with the unthinking certainty of a master craftsman. Every click of the turret, every wipe of the lens, every seating of a round into the magazine was a self-contained universe of focus. She was a ghost at her own execution, a silent dissenter in a court that had already passed judgment. Her appearance was a deliberate act of camouflage. Where the SEALs were broad-shouldered and imposing, she was of average height and build, her frame giving no hint of the wiry strength coiled within. Her sandy hair was pulled back in a severe, functional bun. Her fatigues, slightly faded from sun and use, were devoid of the custom patches and high-speed modifications favored by the operators. To a casual observer, she could have been a logistics clerk, a mechanic, an intelligence analyst, anything but the tip of the spear. This unassuming presentation was her armor, and their prejudice was the ground she had baited them onto. But when the grizzled Master Chief, a man whose face was a roadmap of forgotten wars, saw the small, unassuming device she clipped onto the rifle's Picatinny rail, an en-bloc clip for a meteorological sensor he hadn't seen in a decade, his eyes narrowed. It wasn't standard issue. It was a relic, a whisper from a legendary, almost mythical training program that purportedly took the top 1% of military marksmen and turned them into something else entirely. A flicker of memory, a story told in a hushed voice over cheap whiskey in a forgotten bar, ignited in the old warrior's mind. He saw not the woman Thorne saw, but the tool in her hand, and he understood that it was not a tool, but a key. He saw her stance, the way her shoulders remained perfectly relaxed while her core was engaged, a posture of absolute stability that couldn't be taught, only earned through 100,000 hours of disciplined practice. The Master Chief's gaze shifted from the rifle to Thorne, and a deep, profound sense of unease settled in his gut. It was not a fear for the woman's safety, but for the catastrophic ignorance of his lieutenant commander. The air in the tent was thick with the smell of dust, sweat, and arrogance. The world outside the tent flap was a hostile, unforgiving landscape of rock and ruin, a place that did not care for reputation or ego, only for competence. It was a place where assumptions were paid for in blood. Thorne, blinded by the glare of his own prestige, was writing a check he had no idea how to cash. And Anderson, in her profound and unnerving silence, was the bookkeeper who would soon collect. If you believe that true competence needs no announcement, type silence below. The humiliation, once begun, became a steady, grinding current in the platoon's ecosystem. Thorne, having established his dominance, continued to press his advantage, making it a point to publicly and systematically isolate her. During the mission briefing, he addressed his questions about Overwatch positions and fields of fire to the Master Chief, pointedly ignoring Anderson as if she were a piece of furniture. He referred to her not by her rank or name, but as the attachment, a bureaucratic term that stripped her of identity and purpose. To his men, he called her the plus one, a guest at a party she was not truly invited to. The other SEALs, following their leader's cue, treated her with a cold, professional distance that was more insulting than open hostility. They offered her no shared jokes, no casual conversation, no inclusion in the easy camaraderie that bound them together as a fighting unit. She was an outsider, a foreign object in a closed system, and they made sure she felt it in every glance, every turned shoulder, every conversation that fell silent as she approached. Her silence in the face of this was not passive. It was active, a fortress of composure that seemed to infuriate Thorne even more. He needed a reaction, a crack in her armor that would validate his prejudice. He needed her to be flustered, angry, or intimidated. Her refusal to provide him that satisfaction was a quiet act of defiance that he could not comprehend. During the final gear check in the belly of the CH-47 Chinook, its rotors beginning to whip the dusty air outside into a frenzy, Thorne made his final, most direct assault. He strode over to where she sat on the vibrating floor, meticulously arranging her data sheets on a small, portable lap desk. His large frame cast a long shadow over her, a physical manifestation of his attempt to dominate and diminish. "Look," he began, his voice a low growl designed to be overheard by the rest of the team. "I don't know who you know or what diversity and inclusion memo you wrote on to get this assignment, but out there," he jabbed a thumb towards the fading light outside the ramp. "Rank and politics don't stop bullets. The enemy doesn't care about your feelings." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, condescending whisper. "So here are your rules of engagement. Stay out of the way. Don't touch the comms unless you're actively bleeding out. Your job is to observe and report, nothing more. Do not fire your weapon unless you are directly taking fire yourself. And even then, you wait for my command. Your primary function is to not get any of my men killed. Do you understand me, Staff Sergeant?" The silence that followed was a physical thing, thick with unspoken judgment and the heavy thrum of the helicopter's engines. The other SEALs busied themselves with their own gear, but every ear was tuned to the drama unfolding. They were waiting for the explosion, the protest, the tears, the expected, stereotypical reaction. Anderson didn't look up. She finished her wind drift calculation for the target altitude, her pencil making a neat, precise notation in the margin. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she reached for the charging handle of a rifle. She pulled it back and let it slide forward, chambering a single 338 Norma Magnum round into the barrel. The sound was not the loud, aggressive clank of a standard M4. It was a quiet, oily click, a sound of perfect tolerances and masterful engineering, a sound so soft it was almost imperceptible beneath the noise of the aircraft. But in the charged space between her and Thorne, it was as loud as a cannon shot. It was a sound of finality, a sound of absolute professionalism, a sound that spoke more of lethal intent and unwavering competence than any shouted words or angry retorts ever could. She then looked up, her gaze meeting Thorne's for the first time. Her eyes were calm, clear, and utterly devoid of fear or anger. They held nothing but a deep, dispassionate focus. "Understood, sir," she said, her voice even and steady. And in that moment, for the first time, a sliver of doubt, cold and sharp, pierced Cade Thorne's armor of arrogance. He had expected a soldier. He was beginning to suspect he had found a weapon. The air in the helicopter became heavy, charged with the weight of his prejudice and her unnerving, unbreakable calm. The ramp dropped, and they stepped out into the dying light of a hostile world. The ambush was a masterpiece of tactical cruelty, a textbook L-shaped kill zone executed with brutal precision. As the 10-man SEAL team moved through the narrow, rubble-strewn streets of the abandoned Valley Village, the world erupted. From the craggy ridgelines above and the shattered windows of the surrounding mud brick compounds, at least 40 fighters, maybe more, opened fire simultaneously. The sudden, overwhelming violence was a physical blow, a concussive wave of sound and fury that seemed to compress the very air. RPGs, their trails like fiery green comets, screamed past, impacting with thunderous detonations that kicked up geysers of pulverized dirt and concrete shrapnel. The distinct, high-rate chatter of multiple PCAM machine guns joined the chorus, their heavy 762 by 54 millimeters rounds chewing through the SEALs' scant cover, turning ancient walls into clouds of dust and kicking up vicious sparks as they ricocheted off stone. The air became a solid thing, a hornet's nest of supersonic lead that left no safe space to breathe, no safe place to hide. Contact, contact, contact. Thorne's voice, usually a confident, commanding bark, was strained and tight over the platoon's radio network. We're in the kill box. Pinned down, taking heavy, effective fire from the eastern ridge and the northern compound. Panic, a cold and greasy serpent, began to curdle the edges of their disciplined radio chatter. One of the men was hit, a cry of pain cutting through the static. Another screamed, "I'm out of mags on the saw." Their training, their strength, their superior technology, it was all being overwhelmed by the sheer, crushing weight of numbers and a perfectly prepared trap. They were fish in a barrel, and the enemy was taking its time. From her perch, 1,000 meters away in the crumbling ruin of a forgotten bell tower, Staff Sergeant Maya Anderson watched the tactical situation unfold through the powerful optic of her M210. Her position was a sniper's nest of textbook perfection. She had spent the last hour meticulously preparing it, building a small screen of debris to hide her muzzle flash, laying out her data book, wind meter, and spare magazines in a precise, accessible arc. She was a surgeon in her operating theater. As the chaos erupted below, her internal state remained an island of profound calm. Her breathing was slow, deep, and rhythmic, a meditative cadence that she had practiced for years until it was as natural as a heartbeat. Her pulse, monitored by a small device on her wrist, was a steady 72 beats per minute. While the men of Alpha Platoon were fighting a desperate battle for survival, Anderson was solving a complex, multivariable physics problem. Her hands, steady as the ancient stone she rested on, made a minute adjustment to the parallax knob on her scope, bringing the distant world into crystalline focus. The world for her narrowed, all the noise and fear of the universe compressed into the glowing reticle and the invisible, ever-shifting river of the wind. She saw not 40 enemy fighters, but 40 distinct problems, each with its own unique ballistic solution. She saw not chaos, but a network of command and control that needed to be systematically dismantled. She placed the crosshairs on the first problem, a machine gunner on the eastern ridge whose sustained fire was suppressing half the team. She exhaled half a breath, found a natural respiratory pause, and her finger began its slow, steady press on the trigger. The storm raged below, but in the bell tower, there was only silence, calm, and the quiet promise of precision. The first shot was not a thunderclap of retribution, but a subtle whisper of physics in action. A hiss of compressed air from the suppressor, followed a second later by the distant, sharp crack of the bullet breaking the sound barrier far downrange. On the eastern ridge, the enemy machine gunner, the linchpin of the enemy's suppressing fire, simply collapsed. His head snapped back as if pulled by an invisible string, and his weapon tipped forward, digging its bipod into the dirt before falling silent. The effect was immediate. The stream of tracers that had been chewing up the SEALs' cover vanished, granting them a precious moment to breathe. Before anyone on the ground could fully process what had happened, another muted hiss echoed from the bell tower. Crack! The RPG gunner, who had just shouldered his launcher to take a deliberate, devastating shot at Thorne's position, suddenly dropped his weapon. He stumbled backward a few steps, a look of profound surprise on his face, before crumpling into a heap. The unspent rocket lay inert in the dust beside him. A third shot, and a man with a radio antenna sticking from his backpack, clearly a commander directing fire from a second-story window in the northern compound, disappeared from view in a pink mist. It was not a firefight. It was a dissection. Anderson's movements were a symphony of deadly efficiency, a fluid, unbroken dance of bolt, breath, and trigger press. Her right hand worked the bolt action with an economy of motion that was almost hypnotic, ejecting a spent casing and chambering a new round without her ever leaving the scope. Her left hand made infinitesimal adjustments to the elevation and windage turrets, her mind a supercomputer calculating trajectory, spin drift, and the Coriolis effect in real time. She wasn't just shooting targets. She was deconstructing the ambush with the cold precision of a bomb disposal expert. She prioritized with inhuman logic. First, the heavy weapons that posed the greatest immediate threat, then the leaders who provided direction, then the radio men who connected them to a wider network. With every silenced weapon, with every eliminated commander, the enemy's coordinated assault began to unravel. Their fire became sporadic, then panicked, then hesitant. On the ground, the SEALs felt the change. The storm of incoming fire that had threatened to overwhelm them lessened, then faltered, then all but ceased. They began to gain fire superiority, pushing back the now leaderless and terrified enemy fighters who started to break and run. Thorne, peering through his binoculars at the growing number of inert bodies dotting the enemy positions, could only whisper into his mic, his voice a mixture of awe and utter disbelief. Where the hell is that coming from? Who is that? The final shot from the bell tower took out a fighter attempting to flee on a motorcycle, a moving target at over 1,200 meters. The deafening silence that followed her last shot was a profound and holy thing. It was broken only by the high-pitched ringing in the SEAL's ears, the distant panicked shouts of the retreating enemy, and the collective, ragged gasp of men who had just been pulled back from the very brink of oblivion by a guardian angel they had never seen, an angel whose name they did not even know. They were alive, not because of their own strength, but because of a quiet professional's competence. Back at the FOB, the atmosphere in the debriefing room was thick enough to be cut with a combat knife. The surviving members of Alpha Platoon sat scattered around the room, their usual post-mission bravado and boisterous energy completely absent. They were quiet, subdued, their faces etched with the exhaustion and adrenaline of the near-death experience. A somber reverence had replaced their casual arrogance. They sipped water, cleaned their weapons with shaky hands, and avoided making eye contact with each other, each man lost in the private replay of the battle, each grappling with the undeniable fact that they should be dead. Lieutenant Commander Thorne stood stiffly in the corner, his arms crossed, a statue of conflicted emotions. He stared at a tactical map on the wall, but his eyes weren't seeing it. He was seeing the RPG gunner fall, the machine gun Nesco silent. He was hearing the phantom hiss-crack of the rifle shots that had saved them. He deliberately avoided looking at the room's other occupant, Staff Sergeant Anderson. She was in her own corner, seemingly oblivious to the storm of curiosity and awe she had created. With the same methodical calm she had displayed before the mission, she was meticulously cleaning her M210 rifle, each component laid out on a mat in perfect order. She was a closed circuit, a self-contained entity that needed nothing from the men in the room. The main door to the tent swung open, and the base commander, a grizzled Navy captain named Wallace with a face like tanned leather and eyes that had seen too much, strode in. He was followed by the platoon's Master Chief, whose expression was grim and unreadable. The captain held a tablet computer, his knuckles white as he gripped it. He came to a stop in the center of the room, his gaze sweeping over the exhausted SEALs before finally landing on Thorne. I've just spent the last hour reviewing the helmet cam footage, the drone ISR overlay, and the acoustic sensor logs from your engagement, the captain said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that commanded absolute attention. The official after-action report states that Alpha Platoon was decisively engaged by a numerically superior force and was extracted after the threat was neutralized by unseen friendly Overwatch. I want to know who that was. I want a name. Thorne swallowed hard. The sound was audible in the tense silence. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could he say? That he had dismissed their savior as a liability? That he had ordered her not to fire? His pride and his shame wrestled for control, leaving him mute. All eyes in the room, one by one, drifted from the captain to Thorne and finally settled on the quiet woman in the corner who was now reassembling the bolt of her rifle with surgical precision. The Master Chief, seeing Thorne's paralysis, took a half step forward. "Sir, if I may," he said, his voice respectful but firm. The captain nodded, handing him the tablet. The Master Chief walked over to the room's main display screen and connected the device. The screen flickered to life, and the mystery of the Angel of the Valley was about to be officially revealed. The Master Chief projected the personnel file onto the main screen, and the debriefing room fell into a cathedral-like silence. The document that appeared was sparse, a testament to the secrecy surrounding its subject. It was a landscape of black redaction bars, a government's attempt to keep a ghost a ghost. But the words that remained visible landed like a series of perfectly placed hammer blows, shattering every preconceived notion in the room. Name: Anderson Maya. Rank: Staff Sergeant. Unit: Classified Special Mission Unit. Primary Specialty: Special Operations Target Interdiction / Extreme Long-Range Engagement. The screen scrolled down, revealing more. Combat déploiement, redacted. Special Qualifications, redacted. Confirmed Engagements, redacted. The sheer volume of black ink was more telling than any list of accomplishments. It spoke of a career spent so deep in the shadows that it had no official history. Then, near the bottom of the file, the Master Chief zoomed in on a single line of unredacted text, a line that had been deliberately left visible as a mark of ultimate respect within the intelligence community. Designation: Graduate and Lead Instructor, U.S. Army Special Operations Command, Project Ghost. Longest confirmed combat kinetic effect: 2,815 meters. A collective, sharp inhale sucked the very air from the room. A few of the SEALs exchanged wide-eyed looks of pure disbelief. Project Ghost was not a real thing. It was a myth, a boogeyman program whispered about in spec ops circles after a few too many beers. It was the story told to new snipers to humble them, a legend of a handful of men and women who were taken by the most secretive elements of the command and turned into living, breathing ballistic computers. They were said to be capable of making shots that defied the laws of physics, shooters who operated on a plane of existence far beyond even the most elite marksman. To be a graduate was to be a legend. To be a lead instructor was to be a god of the long gun. And 2,815 meters was over 1.75 miles. It was not a shot. It was a miracle. Captain Wallace stared at the screen for a long moment, his mind processing the impossible truth. He then turned his gaze from the screen to Staff Sergeant Anderson, who had finished reassembling her rifle and was now standing quietly, her hands clasped behind her back. The captain's entire demeanor shifted. The stern commander was replaced by a soldier in the presence of greatness. He slowly, deliberately, reached up and removed his cover, holding it over his heart. He faced her, straightened his back, and rendered the sharpest, most formal salute of his long and distinguished career. It was a gesture of profound respect, a subordinate saluting a master of the craft, regardless of the rank on their collars. Staff Sergeant Anderson. His voice was filled with a reverence that bordered on awe. On behalf of every man and woman in this command, thank you. You have the deck. He held the salute until she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Then, the captain lowered his hand and turned his gaze, now as hard and cold as glacial ice, onto Lieutenant Commander Thorne. Lieutenant, he said, his voice dropping back to a low, dangerous growl. Your file says you're a graduate of the Naval Academy. It seems you were absent the day they taught the meaning of humility. Your assumptions, your prejudice, and your colossal ego nearly cost me an entire SEAL team today. You will stand down from command of Alpha Platoon, effective immediately. Your new assignment is to learn the meaning of respect. And your teacher, he gestured with his head toward Anderson, is standing right there. Dismissed the story of what happened in that forgotten valley and the subsequent humbling in the debriefing room spread not like wildfire, but like a change in the weather. It was not a loud, gossipy rumor, but a deep, undeniable shift in the atmospheric pressure of the entire base and eventually the entire special operations community. The tale of the Angel of the Valley was told in hushed, reverent tones in the Chow Hall, where grizzled sergeants major would use it as a teaching point for young, cocky lieutenants. It was debated on encrypted forums back in Virginia Beach and Fort Bragg, where ballistics experts tried and failed to replicate the physics of her reported shots. Gun cam footage from the SEALs' helmets, heavily censored but still breathtaking, was replayed in training rooms as the ultimate example of what a single, supremely competent individual could achieve. The legend grew with each telling. The impossible shots through shifting winds, the preternatural calm under pressure, the ghost who walked among them, unassuming and unseen until the moment she was needed most. Lieutenant Commander Thorne, however, was not part of the myth-making. For him, the event was not a legend. It was a crucible that had burned away the dross of his character, leaving behind something harder, purer, and infinitely more valuable. The brittle arrogance that had defined him was gone, shattered into 1,000 pieces by the revelation of his own ignorance. In its place grew a quiet, thoughtful humility. He spoke less and listened more. He was removed from command for only 30 days, a token punishment by the captain who saw that the real transformation was already happening internally. When he was reinstated, he was a different man, a better leader. 2 days after the debriefing, he sought out Anderson. He found her on the base's 1,000-meter firing range, a place of disciplined noise and the sharp smell of gunpowder. She was not practicing her own arcane skills. Instead, she was coaching a young Marine Scout sniper, a lance corporal barely out of his teens, whose hands were still clumsy with the complexities of his craft. Thorne watched from a distance for nearly an hour. He saw her patience, the way she adjusted the young Marine's posture with a gentle touch, the quiet words of encouragement she offered. She was not just a master of her craft. She was a guardian of it, dedicated to passing it on. He waited patiently, not daring to interrupt the sacred exchange between teacher and student. When a Marine had finished his firing set and moved off to police his brass, Thorne finally approached, his steps slow and deliberate on the gravel path. He felt like a pilgrim approaching an oracle. The swagger was gone, his posture no longer projecting dominance, but soliciting grace. He was no longer a SEAL lieutenant commander. He was simply a soldier who had been profoundly, irrevocably wrong. Staff Sergeant, Thorne began, his voice low and steady, stripped of its former bluster. It was the first time he had addressed her by her proper rank without a hint of sarcasm. Anderson, who had been cleaning the lens of her spotting scope, turned to face him. Her expression was neutral, unreadable, a calm sea that gave no indication of the depths beneath. "I came to apologize," Thorne continued, meeting her gaze directly. He did not waver. "What I said in the tent on the bird, how I acted, there is no excuse. I was arrogant, and I was dangerously wrong. You saved my life. You saved my men's lives. I will never forget that." He paused, then took a step forward and extended his hand, a universal gesture of peace and reconciliation. Anderson looked down at his outstretched hand, strong and calloused, the hand of a warrior. Then she looked back up into his eyes, searching them for something, sincerity, understanding, true change. She did not take his hand. Instead, she bent down and picked up a single, polished brass casing that lay gleaming in the dust at her feet, still warm from the sun. She stepped forward and placed the small, heavy object into the center of his palm. "Lieutenant," she said, her voice soft but as firm and unyielding as the steel of her rifle barrel. "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to the next operator you judge by their cover instead of their competence. Let this be a reminder." She closed his fingers around the casing, her touch professional and brief. She then turned back to her spotting scope, her lesson to Thorne complete. He stood there for a long moment, his hand closed around the warm brass. The weight of it in his palm was immense, far heavier than its few ounces would suggest. It was the weight of his shame, the weight of his ignorance, but also the weight of his redemption. That single piece of brass, a symbol of the competence he had so foolishly dismissed, never left his pocket for the rest of his distinguished career. It became a touchstone, a physical anchor for the most important lesson a leader could ever learn. Respect is earned in silence, not demanded with noise, and true strength is measured not in volume, but in precision. Years passed, turning events into memories and memories into legends. Lieutenant Commander Thorne became Commander Thorne, and eventually Captain Thorne, one of the most respected and effective operational leaders in naval special warfare. The Bulldog moniker faded, replaced by a new, unstated reputation. He was known for his quiet demeanor, his almost obsessive attention to detail and mission planning, and his uncanny, almost intuitive ability to identify and nurture talent in the most unlikely of places. He never again judged an attached asset by their branch of service, their gender, their age, or their reputation. He judged them by a single, unwavering metric: their professionalism. He sought out the quiet ones, the methodical ones, the operators who let their actions speak for them, because he had learned in the crucible of a dusty valley that the most capable among them often carried the quietest voices. The story of Maya Anderson and the ambush in the valley became a fixture in the institutional folklore of the special operations community. It was no longer just a whispered tale, but a formal case study presented to new officers at the Naval War College and to SEAL candidates during the hellish crucible of BUD/S. It was taught not as a lesson in marksmanship, though the ballistics were indeed legendary, but as a profound lesson in the mortal dangers of assumption and the asymmetrical power of quiet competence. The ruined bell tower in that forgotten, unnamed village began to appear on classified tactical maps of the region. Informally designated Anderson's Perch, it was a landmark signifying a place where a legend was forged in the crucible of combat, a warning and an inspiration. Her single-handed neutralization of an entrenched enemy force of over 40 fighters from extreme range led to a top-down doctrinal review of how Tier 1 enablers, particularly from other branches, were integrated into SEAL platoons. New protocols were written, emphasizing trust, communication, and a mandate for leaders to verify, not assume, the capabilities of their attachments. This change, known internally as the Anderson Protocol, was officially credited with saving dozens of lives in subsequent conflict across the globe, a quiet, bureaucratic ripple effect of her loud, decisive actions. Her legacy was not just in the men she saved that one day, but in the countless others saved by the lesson she taught. Maya Anderson herself was never seen at that FOB again. Almost immediately after the debrief, she and her specialized equipment were gone, extracted in the dead of night as quietly as she had arrived. She faded back into the deep shadows of the classified world from which she came, a true quiet professional whose deeds spoke far louder than any after-action report or medal citation ever could. Her name was scrubbed from official records, her file sealed and buried in a digital vault, leaving only the story, the legend, to endure. Her legacy wasn't a medal pinned to a uniform or a name etched into a granite memorial. It was something more alive, more enduring. It was in the quiet confidence of a young operator methodically checking their gear, trusting their process over their ego. It was in the respectful silence of a leader who now genuinely listened to the input of a subordinate, regardless of their appearance or background. It was in the simple, profound, and hard-won understanding that the most dangerous person in any room is rarely the one making the most noise. True strength isn't broadcast. It is demonstrated in moments of crisis. True respect isn't demanded with arrogant words. It is commanded by undeniable action. And a true legacy is not the story you leave behind, but the positive change you inspire to move forward in others. The small, worn brass casing that Captain Thorne kept in the pocket of his uniform was more than a souvenir. It was a promise. It was a creed, a personal covenant forged in the deafening, life-giving silence that follows the perfect shot, a silent reminder that competence is the only currency that truly matters. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent precision defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.